Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid. I'm here with my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
And today we have a very special guest. Scot Bohaychyk is the market manager for Clearfield, a manufacturer, designer of fiber optic management, protection, and delivery products for the communications industry. Scot has worked for more than 36 years in the telecom industry, and his background includes serving the White House Communications Agency, providing communications infrastructure support. Scot, welcome to Community and Technology.
Welcome. Thank you.
Okay. So maybe you can begin by telling us a little bit about Clearfield and what it does.
Well, Clearfield as a company is a fiber management company in that we do the physical management of fiber, not software management. So sometimes people confuse that. Do high quality connectivity products, fiber management as far as panels, frames, fiber distribution hubs, and then the physical layer connectivity products.
Mm-hmm.
And let me ask you to get some perspective on it, because most people in New York City don't know Clearfield. About how many lines were you responsible for each year?
Well, in that we're not a provider. We're not a network provider. We're an equipment manufacturer. So if you look at the combined, you're talking more than likely millions across the country as far as that goes. But again, we don't provide the service. We just provide the equipment. So you'd have to take all of our customer base and say, okay, how many service, how many people are you serving in that to come up with that number?
And I suspect it's well into the millions.
I would think so, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is why I'm very glad you're here, because you know a lot about what's going on out there. There's $42 billion budgeted to spend, nearly all of which is going to go on fiber, your world.
Yes.
How realistic is it to spend that money quickly?
I guess you can approach it a couple of different ways. The way I look at it now is, we talk about labor shortages or technician shortages and material shortages. As far as the technician shortage goes, what providers are doing to manufacturers like Clearfield and saying, hey, we need a product that's easier to use. We don't have time to train people. You go back in the days of the big telcos, they had whole training departments, and you would go to school for, like I did the same thing. I went to school for over a month on one job function. Well, now they just don't physically have that time. So the push is to a manufacturer said, make me something easier to use. And that's where the term, you've heard the term plug and play. That came out and was really popular. When it was first coined, it was more of just a thing. It's a neat catchphrase. Oh, plug and play. Now it's become a reality in fiber. And the beauty of it is, again, back in those days, the connectors themselves were kind of a high loss. They weren't really good. They were just kind of an okay connector, and you had a lot of a loss budget there. Now the connectors are so high quality, you're getting 10 gig, 100 gig on a connector where before you wouldn't be able to do anything close to that. So.
But I know that Sherry, who you work with, has been speaking out lately about the need to get more people trained.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a very shallow labor pool today. And you have agencies like the FOA, Fiber Optic Association. They have a training program. And we took it upon ourselves to have because we work with our customers to train them on our products, but we also work with our customers to train them on fiber in general. Because if you think about it, a technician that's been, say, a copper splicer his whole life, he knows a little bit about fiber, kind of enough to be dangerous, but he doesn't know the ins and outs and what you really need to know to do something quality. So we have a lady internally that's our director of training, and she's a fiber optic FOA certified trainer. So you kind of train the trainer, so then we can train downstream as well. And other companies are doing the same type of thing, but you're trying to push the traditional technician base into the fiber world. And you're trying to also make, and this is an odd note, schools today, if you go out into a school, an elementary school or middle school or even a high school, they talk about the trades. But when they speak of the trades, they talk about plumbers and electricians. They don't talk about telecom technicians. So the change that we're trying to advocate for is look more at the telecom as well. Because if you think of most telecom technicians, they're a tech there because maybe their dad was, or their uncle was, or a family member was. It wasn't just, ooh, I want to be a lineman today. So that we're advocating for that as well, is to, yes, there is a pathway for a 4-year degree. That's great. But there's also a pathway for a career, not just a job, in the telecom community.
And what does that look like, Scott, in terms of timeline, and what kind of commitment would a potential young person, or an older person for that matter, that might be changing careers, what kind of commitment do they have to make to really grasp the basic know-how to get started in the industry?
Well, I'll answer that kind of as a comparison. So when, again, I started out in telecom when I was very young. I started as a lineman, and it takes about 5 years to make a lineman where he can go on his own and basically not kill himself, because there's lots of weights and things. In the fiber world, it's not quite that bad. In fact, with the advancements of the plug and play, we'll go back to that. You can train a technician in about 3 to 5 days to be functional. And what I mean by that is the installer, the guy that can come into the home and plug the fiber in for the customer. I can take them with a plug and play approach within a few days, and then they can go out and go to work. You have your traditional splicers that take a little more time than that. But again, you can train someone to physically do the splice. And the hard part's not making the splice itself. The machines do that for you. Really the magic in a splicer is the setup of the fiber itself, how to open it, how much to open, and things like that. And again, that can be done in a very compressed timeline because there's so much automation on the other side. So if I can teach the technician how to open the cable, what length to cut it, how to lay it in, how to clean it, and then the machine does the rest for you, then it becomes a very compressed timeline. Instead of months, you're talking about a week or maybe 2, and I can send them in the field and they can be functional at that point.
And how often does one person go out and do it? Last I looked, Verizon, for example, was always putting 2 people on the job.
Yeah, a lot of that has to do with safety as well. So especially if you're in a confined space like a manhole, you have to have a second person. You're not allowed, by OSHA regulations, you have to have the second body. To do an install, let's say 90%, I say 90% of the time, but most of the time it's one person. They go out and they do the whole install. I just got fiber into my house here about 2 months ago. And it was just a guy. He comes out and he runs it around the house and drills the hole and puts it in. So from a splicer standpoint, you're correct. There's usually 2, but that's more of a safety thing than it is anything else.
And then the install itself, you're usually hooking up home Wi-Fi and a whole pile of other stuff. What's involved in learning that, and what kind of skills are necessary?
What's funny about the younger generation now, they already have that. Most of them have Wi-Fi at home. They already know how to do most of that. So there's some specific training involved with a particular manufacturer's product. Just like I say, if you use a Clearfield product, it might be different than a competitor's product. So there's some nuances that they have to learn. But the overall is, again, if you look at it, and I'll look at my setup coming into my house, there's a terminal outside. He plugged the fiber in. He brought it into my house. He plugged it into a jack. He plugged it from the jack into my ONT, and from my ONT into my router. So everything, you just plug it in, and then it's a matter of setting levels. And it's fairly simple. I would say that training, I wouldn't say you need more than a day or 2. You're always going to have that flyer where somebody has a problem, or I can't get, and it goes to a level 2 technician or a level 2, help desk or things like that. But the day-to-day stuff, it took the guy that came into my house maybe a half an hour to set it up.
Which, does that mean that an installer can typically do 4 or 5 a day?
I would say, yeah. Again, the hard part of installation is getting it into the house. Okay, so every house is different. Sometimes he just has to run it a few feet, come through the wall, and he's done. Other times he has to run it through an attic, or I say he, but they. And there's a number of different things. So the factors of time are based more on the physical structure than they are the piece of equipment.
Now, if somebody wanted to get a job or a career in this field,
Mhm.
what would they do?
As far, well, the FOA is a good place to start because the FOA lists training centers and it lists job opportunities and things like that. That if you didn't know anything about anything, I think I would start at a place like that. You can ask me, like us manufacturers like us, who's your customer? Well, we have this customer that, in this area. I have, Bill's telecom service or whatever it happens to be. That's a good resource. The trade schools are starting programs now. I was actually on a panel a few weeks ago that we were discussing this, where the trade shows are starting to recognize the need. But again, Stu, that goes back to your point. What's the timeline on that? That takes time to set curriculum. It takes time to set money aside. And I understood that some of the legislation is earmarking monies for training. But again, that's a slow boat. So if I had to tell a young person today where to go find a job in telecom, short of their local, their AT&T, their Verizon, their Frontier, whoever it happens to be, I would look into those fiber training, programs, because they happen to have a large database of people who need trained or need trained technicians, and that'd be a good resource right there.
And what could expect somebody to find, say they took a course and got out of it? Mm-hmm. What kind of salary? How easy is it to find a job? What kind of advancement?
I think finding a job shouldn't be that difficult. If you go in different stages or different technician levels, so say the lineman or I think they call him a telecommunications technician at that point. He's probably looking at anywhere, if a base doesn't know anything about it, just starting out, he's probably looking at somewhere in the, 38 to 40,000 to start. And again, depending if you're going with a private company or a union, then you're talking the difference in benefits thing. And that job title would probably cap out at somewhere in the maybe 70,000 range. If you went into the fiber technician, you may start at that, like say 40, 45, and you can get into the 100,000, range, the mid hundreds, 120s, depending on the company and depending on the level of technical training. But the beauty in telecom, and I'll tell you this, I didn't get a college degree. I learned all of my stuff through the telecom industry. So a lot of times their courses and training sessions and thing, one, they're normally free. And two, you kind of learn as you go. So I'm earning a living and raising my family, and then I'm bettering myself as I move along. So it's kind of it's a good, at least in my mind, it's a good model, because you can go out and earn today, and while you're earning, you're learning, and then while you're learning, you're advancing all in the same time.
I remember a fellow who started out as a lineman here in New York, mm-hmm. and did pretty well.
Yeah.
You remember Ivan Seidenberg?
I do not. I'm in Ohio, so.
I certainly do. He ended up being the CEO of Verizon some time ago.
So he started as a lineman.
Yes, he did.
He started out as a lineman, no college degree, mm-hmm. used the tuition benefits, what was then 9. No, actually, that was probably New York Telephone.
New York Tel, yeah.
Him to go to college at night.
Yep.
And also got an MBA, and along the line convinced people that he was really competent. And he wound up being not merely the head of Verizon, making $20 million a year, enough to donate a building to the college he went to, which was Pace. He also was one of the most respected, because he actually knew what was going on out there. And that is not as common as you'd think.
No, it's actually very uncommon. And I would say the sad note of that is, or the beauty of him doing that, is he knows what the entry-level guy needs to go through. He knows what has to happen. And if I'm the leader, I can say, okay, I need to make sure I provide them the tools they need to do this, and the courses and the career path, versus I just have a job there. Because again, and I want to encourage young people that they need to understand that this can be a career, and it can be a very lucrative career. If you the only advice I gave some of my technicians that when fiber was really picking up was the copper technicians. I said, you need to look at the fiber. You need to look at, transitioning to fiber, because we know that's where it's going to go. And the ones that did, very easy transition, moved along, advanced. The ones that didn't, they didn't lose their jobs, but they found themselves a lot of time with not a lot of work. It was just, kind of hit or miss. So,
Well, that's changed, hasn't it? They laid it off an awful lot of technicians at places like AT&T the last few years.
yep. And I wouldn't sit here and try to tell AT&T how to do their business. I don't know why they did. They have their reasonings for doing that. The beauty if the technician had some sort of fiber training, he could go outside to contractors, and there's other places to go. Nobody wants to lose their job, especially at a large telco like that, because there's all the benefits and things that go with it. But if I have a skill set that I can transfer over, and that goes back to I don't want to change to fiber, I'm going to stick with copper. Well, there's not a lot of outside copper splicing or copper work, but there is a lot of fiber work. And now, especially, there's those same people that have fiber training over here that may have gotten laid off. They're very sought after by the other outside companies because they need that skill set.
Are there certifications, Scott, for some of the fiber training, or is it mostly just on the job training and you have the skill or you don't? How does that work?
Well, it depends on the person and the company both. Like I say, with the FOA, that's formal training. It's accredited and certified. When I first went through fiber training, it was within the company, and it was just a course you took and you got a little certificate. Now, could I take that certificate and show it to somebody? Probably. Would they accept it? Maybe. Where like an FOA type training, that's transferable across the board. So that's the beauty of that is that you get this, it follows the technician and isn't just with the company.
Stu, you've been connecting people for at least the 25 years I know you, and I think you have some experience before that. How'd you learn? Did you go to Columbia University and Columbia College to learn how to splice?
Much like Scott, though I am a college graduate, I learned on the job by doing. Early on in my training, I became an installer just to learn the business. I was interested in building a business, and much like Dave's example with Ivan Seidenberg, I and my partner at the time, and still today, decided that we needed to go out in the field and become installers and learn about the business, learn about the customers, learn about how you wire, how you run the cables, how you interface with the customer, how do you schedule, how do you route your work. I mean, just all the little teeny steps in actually getting it done. And it ended up being quite valuable later on as we evolved and built. Back then, we started out in the cable business going back some decades, but it really informed us in terms of how to build a business, knowing from the ground up, just like you said, Scott, knowing all the details about what it takes to get something done.
And the beauty of that is you were making money at the time. You were being paid,
yes,
to acquire that skill.
That's right.
And I get the point of going to college and doing that same thing. I did that. I went to college for 2 years and decided to go in the military. So, it's the beauty of it, taking that pathway. And again, it's one of those things we try to tell the young people now is that, communications is kind of sexy now. It never used to be. It was just this thing over there that you would, couldn't find another job, go do that. But you acquire that skill set, and that skill set transferred for you into a business.
Exactly.
And I understand you understand all the backroom things that need to be done to make that business successful. And that's very, very valuable.
Now, let me ask the next level. People may start as a technician, but hopefully, I think there's more of a shortage of managers right now than technicians, what I'm hearing from some people. How long does it take you can supervise the teams out in the field and get promoted before you have that kind of experience and knowledge?
Well, that kind of depends on the person a little bit, and it also depends on the job. So I mentioned I was a lineman first. It takes about 5 years to keep build alignment where he's safe. You could at that point transfer over, but the problem of inexperienced management at that type of job is that it's dangerous work. I mean, so you got to be a little careful with that. In the more tech oriented, so say like installation, splicing, and things like that, depending on the person, I think give them a year or two of good, solid, learn the job, then have a year or two of experience, and then start looking and say, okay, is the personality suitable? And that's the route I took. I was a lineman first, but then I became a line manager, and then a splicing manager, then a fiber manager. So I had a career path. Whether or not the company had it mapped out, I kind of had it mapped out in my head. This is where I'd like to go. But that was me. Now I have people that came in the same time I did, and they were splicers their whole career. That's your choice.
The other supposed shortage is equipment.
Mhm.
What's the reality in the field right now? Say I was ready to get a government grant to build out a small town in Wisconsin. What would I need to know? What kind of delays are we actually facing?
That's tough. The supply chain, if you want to call it that, and depending on, are we talking electronics or the physical glass itself or things like that, it's all very tough right now. It's hard. The lead times are longer than they've ever been. Thankfully for us, there were some forward-looking folks within Clearfield, and they planned ahead, and we have, yes, we're longer lead times than we like to have, but they're at least not as long. But it's very hard right now. Some of the basic requirements like vaults and things that go out in the field are 40, 50 weeks out. Well, if I'm going to get and that's where the build out dollars have to have some caveat, because the government's putting timelines. When you get the money, you have a timeline. I have to build out so far and hit my milestones. I haven't seen any document out there yet, anyway, that I know of, that says, but if you can't get material, what are we going to do? And that's across the board. I think it's across with every company out there. Their lead times are way out. Go back to 3 years or 4 years. We never saw lead times like that. If you told me I had 20 weeks lead time, I'd go somewhere else. But it's tough across the board. We do some things internally to help mitigate that. So we hope at least our customers are not feeling quite as much pain as maybe the other is.
But how much of that is shortage of production capacity, and how much of that is companies like yours and all your customers building up inventory and creating even more demand? I mean, Corning's putting up some pretty big factories, and you just invested in a factory in Finland, and you're going to produce in Mexico, I think.
Yes, we just announced that yesterday, I think. But yeah, and that investment, the investment in, you're talking about the Finland fact, that helps us manage our supply chain. Because if we have to rely on a separate company to build something for us that we don't control, it makes it very difficult to manage your inbound supply chain. So those are the steps we took. Again, I said, there were some forward-thinking people at Clearfield that said, let's look ahead and what do we need to do? Now you say Corning's building some big factories. Well, building big factories takes a lot of time. So you don't see any relief for a year or two till that factory comes online, and then you got to ramp up that production. So that's the crystal ball, I guess you want to call it that. And I think, at least in our case, we looked far enough ahead, I think, to help move it forward, because bringing that capacity online, it doesn't take years. You can come online within months. And that's part of our Mexico operation. The point was to build up so we have the capacity to meet the customer demand. Now you start talking raw materials, that's some of those things, it's tough to control. But again, if the company looks forward enough and says, well, let's pre-purchase raw materials so we have them, that makes you more, viable, at least right now. And you can't do that with everything. I mean, you talk about chipsets and things like that. Those are things that are beyond almost anyone's control. And I hate to say, but you're kind of hoping for the best on those. But so far, at least from what we're seeing, is our customers at least are doing okay. They're making it. They're meeting their deadlines. Will that change? We don't know. But as far as we're concerned, they're at least managing their demands.
Okay,
And
we're
I'm gonna ask
about
you to-
at our break time, Dave.
After the break, I'm going to ask our guests to talk about how these factors make a difference for what the government wants to build in broadband. Can we do a lot in 2022? Is some of it going to be pushed out to 2025? After the break.
Okay, this is Community and Technology. You're listening to WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after a quick musical break.
Birds flying high, you know how I feel. Sun in the sky, you know how I feel. Breeze drifting on by, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day. It's a new life for me, yeah. It's a new dawn, it's a new day. It's a new life for me. Ooh, ooh, ooh. And I'm feeling good. Fish in the sea, you know how I feel. River running free, you know how I feel. Blossom on the tree, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me. And I'm feeling good. Dragonfly out in the sun, you know what I mean, don't you know? Butterflies all having fun, you know what I mean. Sleep in peace when day is done, that's what I mean. And this old world is a new world and a bold world for me. Yeah, yeah. Stars, when you shine, you know how I feel. Scent of the pine, you know how I feel. Oh, freedom is mine, and I know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me.
Okay, we're back. Community and Technology, WHCR 90.3 FM. Dave Burstein, Stu Reid with special guest, Scot Bohaychyk, market manager for Clearfield. Dave.
Yeah. There's a lot of people, like my friend Tim Wu, who's now in the White House, who want to bring the internet, decent internet, to everybody in the country. Joe Biden was just there yesterday doing a White House press conference saying that's exactly what he was going to do. They have $65 billion to do that, which is more than enough, except for a few political problems, to get an excellent connection to 99% of the United States. The 42 billion of that is set to build. And the rules for that came out in what's called a NOFO about 10 days ago. And it clearly is going to be overwhelmingly building fiber in rural and extreme rural areas. there is $0 for us in New York City to build anything, for example. There's probably $0 even for a town like yours, the size of Akron, which probably has cable just about everywhere. The question is that going to be realistically done fairly quickly? Biden is very hopeful that he's going to get it done before his first term ends in 2024. Do you think that most of the raw fiber builds that you're supplying are going to be able to complete themselves in 3 or 4 years?
I'm gonna answer that kind of not vaguely, but a little bit. Yes and no. Yes, because actually I was talking before we started, the rural providers. Okay, if we took the independent telcos, and Clearfield, we happen to know the independent telcos, that's kind of where we cut our teeth. You go out into Montana somewhere or out, we had fiber to the farm. They've had that 5, 6, 7 years ago. I happen to live in Ohio. You go into the western part of our state, it's a lot of independent telcos. They've had fiber for years to the home already. So they know how to do that. The problem they were facing was having the money, when you have to go out 10 miles outside of town and pass 3 houses in a mile or 3 houses in 5 miles, it wasn't, the return on the investment wasn't there. So those monies we're talking about help do that. Now, you speak to fixed wireless, same thing. Wireless and fiber aren't necessarily enemies. They can work together. So when you start looking at 5G and small cells and DAS and all that thing, the one thing people sometimes don't realize is that site is fed by a fiber. So across the board, fiber is king. It doesn't make any difference. You can argue a case for wireless that it will provide the service. Now, what that service level, they set the thresholds at certain throughput and things like that. But the end game, it has to be fiber at the end of the day. It just really does. There's a town a little bit north of me here that decided to deploy fiber as a municipality. Their plan was deploy wireless and then underbuild fiber. They got about 3 months into it and they decided, you know what, it's just simpler to just build the fiber and be done with it. Now, given that town already had broadband services through cable or whatever other thing was out, twisted pair, but that same model can go out west. And I think these independents and these providers in rural America are very, very good at what they do. The one great thing about it, there's not a lot of concrete. You come into New York City, it's very, very difficult to get fiber down. In fact, I've done a few projects up that way, and it's very difficult. One, regulatory. 2, the physical properties of concrete and everything around me. When I have 6 feet of topsoil, it's pretty easy to plow that. When I have 4 feet of concrete, much more difficult. So yeah, I think in the long run, they'll make it. Now, is it by 2025? That's going to be a heavy lift, again, depending on the supply chain. But we in America are very, very good at what we do. I hear people making the argument, well, Europe does this and they do that. I said, well, if you take like England, that's about the size of Florida. So it's 1/50th the size of the United States. So well, England did it, why can't we? Well, that means a state did it, not. So I hate when they compare us to Europe because those are two different animals. But we have the capacity here in the States, and we have the capacity to ramp up production and training and all the other things that need to go with all that. So yeah, I think we'll make it, but maybe not quite by that, end of the first term thing.
How much could the industry increase production this year, 2022? They started writing checks tomorrow.
Well, the way I look at it is we're basically halfway through 2022. So it's not going to be a giant ramp up. You had to be looking at that ramp up. And again, that's something we did. We were looking back 2 or 3 years ago to ramp up for production. Now, that was a gamble when you think about it, because you don't know, nobody knew that the $68 billion was coming. There was rumors of it and all the other things. We know how bureaucracies work. And if you think about it, that money is just trickling out now. I mean, it's really just coming out. Nobody just really kicked it into high gear. But
And if it's just coming out now and you have 40 and 50 week delays, does that mean that somebody getting money now is probably going to have to wait until the middle of next year to even get started?
well,
And if more money comes, is it going to be even worse?
I don't know if it's going to be worse because the manufacturers have picked up the pace. Because we're like any other industry out there. You look at the future and say, okay, does it make sense to stage? Which in our case, we invested in some facilities. Said, yeah, we think something's coming. We're going to make sure we have the capacity to ramp that up. So once you have the internal infrastructure to do that, ramping up's pretty easy at that point. Now, again, we're not getting, as a company, we're not getting that money, but our customers are, and our customers say, okay, now we're going to need to do this. So looking at that, you say, what do we think, or where do we think we need to be in order to absorb that new influx of business? So, I don't think we're the only company in the world that does it. The other companies are doing the same thing. So yeah, I think the manufacturers are picking up pace. It's a little bit of a lag, simply because you can't just turn the switch on and make 10 times, but you can certainly in the first year go up maybe twofold or threefold, and then do it again and again, and be reasonable at that growth. So I'm confident we're going to do, as far as the country, I think we're going to make the number, whether it's fiber to everything. I hope so, but I think working with the wire.
Washington made it pretty clear.
Yeah.
When I was involved in some of the infrastructure planning, and the folks who took over want to do fiber. Jonathan Adelstein, in fact, the original proposal coming out that became the infrastructure plan called for 100 megabits up and down, and getting 100 megabits up is really questionable with wireless.
Yeah,
that got changed. That got changed because Jonathan Adelstein essentially told the congressional Democrats who were relying on him that, well, if you want to have competition, you're going to have to let my wireless guys. Jonathan ran the Rural Utilities Service back in the day. Before that, he was an FCC commissioner and a Senate staffer. He's a liberal Democrat, 20 years experience in the field, and they listen to him. So the way the legislation is written, they have to get 100 over 20. But there's a lot of, but they also put into it a lot of provisions that favor fiber. And it's not at all clear how much, actually it is pretty clear. It's pretty clear that of the people that are going to be reached by this program, which are the last 5 and 10%, almost all rural, almost all extreme rural, you're not going to be able to deliver a gigabit of wireless to them.
No.
Because that needs millimeter wave.
Right.
And millimeter wave doesn't have the reach, no matter how much Ericsson and my friend Ted Rappaport get out there. And yes, Ted Rappaport, NYU professor, invented a lot of this stuff. Very good guy. The prince of millimeter wave. On his house on a hill in West Virginia, where he used to be a professor, and he's kept a house there, he can get a signal 5 miles away to somebody with line of sight in the valley.
Yeah, in a perfect environment, it works. I mean, I agree. And I think that's where you need to blend the wireless and the fiber. Even a wireless guy will tell you, the quicker I offload to fiber, the better it's going to be. Millimeter wave in a tight environment without trees or without any kind of obstruction, or even walls for that matter, I mean, it does work and everything. That's when people tell me we do pair bonding of copper and I can achieve gigabit. In a perfect world, sure you can. But in reality, I go into this old building that has 1950s copper in it, you're not going to do that. It just doesn't physically, physics steps in at that point. So this doesn't work. So it's the same thing with wireless and line of sight and all those things. There is a place. And if I can't get something to that last 1%, but I can give them this, that's better than nothing.
Oh, no. The last 1% or 0.44%, the US broadband plan will figure it out when it is brutally expensive because there's 3 people on an offshore island.
Yeah.
Or it's 8 miles. Wireless is not going to do 8 miles, no matter what you're doing. And
even if it could, you still have to follow up with fiber at some point, because the end game, and I'll argue the point with anybody, I guess, but the end game is fiber's king. And we can argue that all we want, but it's still, if you're going to provide that level, asymmetrical 100 even, you're going to have glass out there. You just have to. And again, that goes back to me, physics. Unless someone comes up with a wonderful line of sight that can penetrate fog and trees and buildings and stuff, I don't see it ever getting to that level.
3 a.m. coming morning, I have to be on a webinar in Brussels. It's all about using fixed wireless to close the digital divide. And they have the telco, it was put together by the telcos, and they got some very senior people, top EU guys, 2 top EU women, the lead regulator in Greece, who's about to take over BEREC, that is going to be the thing. And they're going to be explaining why they have to give major government subsidies for wireless as the only practical way to cure the digital divide. Now, Europe has shorter distances than we have.
Yeah.
Any reason you couldn't fiber most of it?
It tells me you could. I mean, you even look at, I have some experience over in the UK. I look at the small villages, I guess, or hamlets, or whatever you want to call them. That's where technologies like micro trenching and all that came about. That you can. There's different ways to do it other than the traditional. Maybe directional drilling is not the way to do it. Maybe, but again, if you look at a vast majority of those hamlets or burgs, there's a lot of aerial plant. So there's a lot of ways to get fiber there where I won't necessarily need. If I have to put an antenna on that pole, why did I not just run fiber down that pole? Or those are the kinds of things I look at from a practical standpoint. I think when you start saying the only practical way, it means that it's the only, in their mind, the cheaper way to do it. It doesn't cost me as much to get it there. But again, at the end of the day, you're not going to achieve, and I'll give millimeter wave its due, very short distances and very minimal penetration. And again, if I look at European homes, they're made of stone. That's a tough ask for millimeter wave to penetrate a stone wall. Things like that. So that's how I look at it. I said, so it'll be interesting to see what you find out, but I don't, at least in my mind, see how the fixed wireless would be the end game to provide any substantial level of broadband.
And in fact, the reason I'm going to get up that early in the morning is to make as clear as I can to some of these people who are spending billions that they'd have no idea what they're talking about and have been sold a bill of goods. Not because there aren't places for fixed wireless. There are a few, but not many.
No.
But they don't need a subsidy. Are you involved at all with some of the people supplying T-Mobile's towers for wireless?
That's not part of my purview inside the Clearfield, but I would assume we are at some point. Now, to the degree that there's fiber on the tower, fiber to the tower, things like that. So,
yeah, the reason I asked that is because T-Mobile is committed to bringing 100 megabits down to 90% of the United States in the next couple of years, and 5G to 99% without any subsidy. T-Mobile, as we can tell by the name, is owned by Deutsche Telekom. They also happen to own the phone company in Greece, where a lot of this has been happening, a major part of the British, and across Eastern Europe. There's no reason that if T-Mobile in the US, where, as you mentioned, we had these distances that you have to overcome, can do 99% 5G, they can't do it over there as well.
Right.
And what's going on is the telcos are putting on a huge misinformation campaign that certain inhabitants of the White House would be very proud of the quality, because everybody's believing them. Not even a small majority. All the people in decision making there think that they must subsidize because wireless is practical, and it is. I just wrote an article about why I was ready to transfer to wireless. I could get a faster upstream than my cable company can deliver me from T-Mobile. Just tested it out with my phone. I do better with a fixed wireless and a big antenna, and a pretty decent downstream as well. And I'd save $20 a month. And we just got the numbers. T-Mobile now has 1 million fixed wireless. Fixed wireless is going to be part of the game. It works.
Yeah.
It still has some rough edges. They're still building out the mid-band. It's not ideal for the rural areas with long distances. But
No.
in your typical suburb, or even here in Manhattan, it's going to be a viable choice for people.
Sure, and I agree. And I think when they acquired Sprint, and Sprint had what, the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum, a large chunk of it, right? So I think that helps their plan. The only thing I look at it from a practical standpoint too is when you are deploying from go from LTE to 5G, you have to deploy the 5G first before you can pull the LTE away. And from a physical tower structure, and that's something the tower engineers look at. It's I have twice the loading on my tower for a period of time. Can the tower physically take that? And that's why I've been a big proponent of fiber up the tower. Take the coax off the tower, because you take a lot of weight off and you take a lot of wind load and all the other stuff that goes away with it. So that's something that my mind struggles a little bit on their aggressiveness of their plan. Can they do that from a physical structure standpoint?
Yes. And the reason I say it though definitively is they've already done 60% of the country.
Okay, well, there you go.
Years.
There you go.
So that I'm sure there are some problems, and getting from 80% to 90 and 99% is going to be hard work and not so cheap. But they've already proven it can do it. And they've already proven it can give the performance into the hundreds of megabits, except at the edge of the cell site. But for many people, it's going to be part of the game.
And I guess at the end of the day, that's good. And that's why I say fiber and wireless they shouldn't really be in any. They work together in some aspects. I know it's a competition in other aspects, but I think at the end of the day, we're going to see that blend. And you see it even now in the urban areas, in the common, like the malls and the open areas and the markets and all this stuff. That's wireless fed, as far as to the consumer. The backhaul may be fiber, but that's wireless and fiber working in conjunction with each other anyway. And
that sounds like Wi-Fi mostly. And you're talking about a mall.
I'm thinking like a DAS and a small cell, things like that. Maybe a little broader area than a downtown area.
Yeah. Now, what should I have asked you that I didn't think to ask you? What are the big issues that we haven't talked about?
I don't know. I think, municipalities, that's something that's the sheer build out. And when you start looking at municipalities and pole access and things like that, that's something that needs to be considered. And I know there's some legislation out there that makes access to poles easier. But what we've seen, again, I came from a smaller town. When you have maybe two carriers come into town and they need 100 sites apiece approved by the local, municipality, they have one zoning guy. He doesn't have the physical capacity to do that. So now you're pushing my project back 3, 4, 5 months because you don't have the physical abilities to get in there and do that. That's a challenge that are facing a lot of the carriers out there. It's, the small town may like it, may want it, but until they can get the zoning guy to approve each and every site, that's a tough call. So that's some of the roadblocks they run into. So again,
Now, do you usually solve that within, say, 6 months? Verizon told me that, yeah, it's a pain, but they learn to work the system and they get it done.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable. Yeah, it's reasonable, and there's a couple different avenues for that. One is, you, the carrier, work with a municipality. The other is manufacturers come up with products that don't necessarily need an easement to put it there. Like a fiber distribution hub, instead of mounting it on a pad in the right of way that requires an easement to get to, maybe they do a strand mount, or maybe they do a pole mount, or maybe they do something a little bit different. So, and that's happening all the way around too. Customer manufacturer like us, we're coming out with ideas, connectivity for smart poles. Something small that fits inside versus something that has to sit on the sidewalk. So that's kind of happening across the board. But I think
we're losing time, but I got to ask you this since you put it. They're currently building about what's the plan for 40 to 80,000 20-foot poles across New York City.
Mm-hmm.
You already have the PC link out there, and those are currently kiosks doing Wi-Fi.
Yeah,
they got the approval from the city to put 20-foot poles on all of them that are going to be put with Wi-Fi, but the money is in putting 5G on that. It's the first committed large build of 5G to every light pole or something close to that. And that can be millimeter wave.
Yep.
That can give you a gigabit to most people. It's really exciting and it hasn't been publicized. What would be involved in the stuff that you do, providing the backhaul for that? Is that something that can be done in reasonable time?
Yeah.
Or is cutting through New York City for that going to really be tough?
Well, I think it comes down to the acceptance of some different technologies as far as construction is involved. Again, I'm a big proponent of microtrenching, and that's gotten somewhat of a bad rap over the last few years because of, they say, streets are heaving or things. Basically, microtrenchers making a saw cut and you're putting a microduct and you bring in fiber to that. Okay, so that's where we would live. That microtrench with our microduct with a microfiber in there. That's great. And I try to tell people that the magic in microtrenching isn't the cut; it's the restoral and the restoral material. And if there's good restoral material, you can come through very, very quickly down a city street, saw cut, lay the fiber in, get it into the 5G pole, restore it, and never really disrupt traffic. The horror stories I hear is, I think it was in California, where the contractor used a subpar aggregate to backfill it, and then over the next year it heaved, and all the bad stories you hear about that. But again, if New York, for example, accepts the microtrenching technology, it can work. If they're going to go traditional, jackhammer the sidewalk up, that takes a tremendous amount of time, lots of disruption, never going to happen. They'll never make it. So there has to be that give and take on construction technologies, micro technologies as far as fibers and pipes, in conjunction with using existing structures and put your poles on top of it. I think if you mix all that together, you have a very viable plan to deploy it.
One of the most respected landline engineers, one of the inventors of DSL, Tom Starr, looked at this proposal and he said, that could work. That's a totally different way of looking at it. It could make a whole lot of fiber to the home obsolete in 10 years, maybe. And that's why it's interesting to look at.
Yeah.
Let me thank you. Stu, you want to have anything to say?
No, I think we've covered it all. I want to thank Scott for joining us. So we've been speaking with Scot Bohaychyk, market manager for Clearfield. And Scott, thanks for joining us on Community Technology.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay. This has been Community Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on WHCR 90.3 FM. Stay tuned every Wednesday, 5 to 6 p.m. Thanks again. Good night.